Then I come up with the idea that our mind is the brain plus language, that language extends the brain into a mind. Before language, the brain was nothing but a percept processor. I feel hunger, I see a deer, an antelope, I instinctively pick up my spear, I throw it at the animal, I kill it, I eat it, and I'm working on percepts. Now, when I have language, I talk to my friends and I say, Carlos, Irena, we're going to go out tomorrow, we're going to go hunting, I know where the deer drink the water, we're going to chase them and then make them fall off the cliff, and then we have lots of food to eat. So that requires language. And it is with language that we emerged as humans from our hominid ancestors. So, the emergence of verbal language represents three simultaneous bifurcations, from percepts to concepts, from the brain to the mind, and from archaic Homo sapiens to full-fledged human beings. Okay, now I will talk about the topic of e-week. We're going to talk about mobility and electricity. Marshall McLuhan made a very interesting statement for e-week. He didn't know it at the time, but he said that men, by the way, Marshall McLuhan belongs to another era. So instead of saying people, he would say men. He was sexist. But don't hold that against him. It was part of his way part of his culture growing up back then. So men, or people, are suddenly nomadic gatherers of knowledge, nomadic as never before, but also involved in the total social process as never before. Since with electricity, we extend our central nervous system globally, instantly interrelating every human experience. Now, these words were written in 1964. Before there were microcomputers, before there were cell phones. He was talking about television and the telephone. But what he says is so true of today's communication environment. You are each nomads. You walk around with your cell phones. Some of you have iPhones, like Carlos, and there he sits and he's going onto the internet and he's gathering information for the entire globe. And not only that, he can take that little computer with him anywhere he goes. I'm old-fashioned. I don't have an iPhone. I just have my notebook, my MacBook. But I carry it with me everywhere. And Carlos said to me, you don't need your computer today. We're going for lunch. No, I have to take it with me. Why? Because this computer is an extension of my mind. I have a pretty good memory, but I can't remember everything. And if I remember a key word, I can look it up on my computer and bingo. I'm smarter as a result of this computer. Okay. So, Marshall McLuhan wrote a book called Understanding Media. I'm now giving a homework assignment to everybody in this aula magna. You must read Understanding Media by Marshall McLuhan, even before you read my books, because he and Harold Innis, both professors at the University of Toronto, were the first ones to understand that communication was a process, that independent of the content of any medium, the medium itself had its message. The medium itself had an effect, independent of what was on it. Let's take television as an example. Television has a certain effect on us, independent of what the content is. It turns us into zombies. When you watch television, you become a passive recipient of information. I watch television, I admit it. I like to watch it just before I go to bed because it makes me very sleepy. Now, they talk about educational television. My apologies to anybody involved with educational television. But in certain sense, it's a contradiction in terms because You can't learn something unless you interact with the information. When you're reading, you're interacting with the words. You have to actually turn the visual signs. I'm doing a little semiotics now, Carlos. We have to turn the visual signs into sounds in our mind and with meaning. So we're engaged. When you're using the internet, you're totally involved with the information. You have things you can click on, and so you can choose whatever path you want through the internet to learn. You only learn by interacting. You do not learn by being a passive recipient of information. I did not learn my few words of Catalan by just hearing people speak Catalan in the streets or in the restaurant. I had to make an effort. I had to interact with the words. My first word that caught my attention in Catalan was the word A-M-B. Because I know some Spanish, I know some Italian, I know some Romanian, and they all use the word con for So anybody in the audience that knows the origin of the word please speak to me afterwards. Okay. So McLuhan wrote about the media of his day. He never saw a personal computer. He never even saw one of the mainframe computers. In 1964, only the priesthoods of information were allowed to use computers. Computers were in an aula magna with air conditioning. You couldn't even walk on the floor. There was a platform, because underneath the platform were all the wires. And I had the privilege in 1965, when I was writing, 64, 65, when I was doing my PhD thesis, to be able to use the mainframe computer at MIT, which is like the Vatican of technology. And that computer had nowhere the amount of processing capability of this machine that sits here on the table. In fact, that computer had about the same processing capacity of a computer of 10 years ago. So he didn't know anything about computing, and all of his ideas were based on mass media, television, radio, telephone, telegraph. But his ideas of that the medium is the message, that the medium has an effect independent of its contents, was the central idea of McLuhan. So in my newest book, which will come out in the spring of 2009, is to update Marshall McLuhan's book his book was called Understanding Media, Extensions of Man. And so I've written a new book called Understanding New Media, Extending Marshall McLuhan. And so what I've done is two things. One, I look at all the media that he looked at, radio, television, telephone, and talk about how the new media have changed them. And then I tackle the new media themselves and describe how they operate. So I cannot, in 1 hour or 45 minutes, go through 5 or 6 books that I've written. So I will briefly describe the main things that I learned by writing this book. So I identified 14 characteristics of the new media, which explain their success and rapid adoption. In McLuhan's language, these are the 14 messages of the new media. This is the information, this is the impact of these media, these communication media, independent of what content they carry. Now, I begin with a drink of water.